Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 3rd of May 2024. So I'm a little bit later today. I was up until 1:30 watching election results come in. I am so addicted to that kind of stuff. I love the stats, I love the numbers, and I just can't stop watching. And I had to really force myself to actually turn off the TV. And when I don't get much sleep because of my multiple sclerosis, I then can't walk the next day very well, and everything is just much more difficult. And so if I don't make a lot of sense today, I'm really sorry. But it's just, yeah, fascinating stuff. I could do a whole video on local elections in the UK, and honestly, it could last about 4 hours. That's how much I have to say about it. Right. Okay. We'll look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and they can be found in the description to the video below. By the way, I might do an update on the stats, on the general staff stats over time. Dell's statistics that are in the description to this video. They are a great open source resource for us all to look at consistently. So you're always welcome to click on the link, the OneDrive link in the description, and you can check how these stats look over time. Anyway, 1,270 personnel losses, a huge number. Again, this is, I think, the 7th day in a row that it's been over 1,000, which is huge. I mean, that is telling us a story, is telling us that the Russians, I think, are really pushing, but it might also be saying that there are large accumulations of troops that are being targeted by the Ukrainians. We know that that's happened once this week with the ATACMS strikes on a training establishment in Luhansk. So that could have been happening in other places as well. Now that the Ukrainians have access to long-range missiles and the aid package is filtering through, we might see what we saw, if you remember, during the counter-offensive period, the early part of that, and indeed before that. We just haven't really seen it for almost a year to the same degree as we were previously seeing it, which was the strikes on places in Zaporizhia Oblast, in southern Donetsk Oblast, behind the front lines in Donetsk and Luhansk, the consistent hammering of barracks, of bases, of command and control nodes, of logistics, of fuel dumps and supply depots. Of course, part of that will be Russia reacting to Ukraine successfully doing that and moving their supplies back. But now, of course, they can reach further. The Ukrainians, those bases where they have moved things back to, will themselves become targets. Anyway, 22 tanks is a high number of tanks, 33 APVs, likewise armoured personnel vehicles, that's infantry fighting vehicles and armoured personnel carriers, and mine resistance ambush protection vehicles, so 33 of those in a day is heavy. And then, wow, 58 artillery systems. That is phenomenal. Now, of course, I said the other day, remember, that probably includes large mortar pieces such as 82mm mortars. Obviously will include self-propelled mortars, but that's a larger category than you might think, but still 58 in one day is huge. So those are massive categories. All 4 of those are really significant, and that shows that even though it's looking pretty terrible for the for the Ukrainians on the front line in terms of Russians taking territory in particularly the Avdiivka sector, but also elsewhere as well, it comes at a huge cost to the Russians. Now, the question is, I mean, how much can we justify believing these figures? And that's what I seek to set out on a daily basis and have been doing for 2 years. So it's funny when you get Russian trolls that come along and say, oh my God, you're just listing these and not the Ukrainian figures, blah, 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 as if I haven't been trying to justify these figures every day for 2 years. Anyway, 42 vehicles and fuel tanks, 5 pieces of special equipment. That's pretty high numbers in the vehicles and fuel tanks category as well. High number. So this is, I think, a good day for the Ukrainians. We don't have any stats from Andrew Perpetua yet. Remember, he had the massive list yesterday that entailed, mainly going through one Magyar video with 140 clips of things being blown up, and that was reflected in a massive list of Russian destroyed and damaged and abandoned equipment. Nonetheless, we'll go and look at a few things. I think this is interesting. We've seen from both the British and now the French that actually there are some analysts who believe that the Russians have lost really high numbers of personnel killed. So according to French Foreign Minister, this is their Foreign Minister, 150,000 Russian soldiers have been killed since the start of the offensive in Ukraine. So remember, the absolute bare minimum of Russians that have been killed, and bare minimum by quite a large margin, is, what is it, 51,000 soldiers have definitely died, because that's what's been clocked by BBC Russia and Mediazona, looking at obituaries and death certificates and online declarations of deaths that have 100% been linked to the war. So that it's quite high level of what's a high criterion to get qualification for that list, and it doesn't include DPR and LPR, so the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic militia troops who have been obviously used for 2 years and often been used as kind of if an area is being commanded by conventional forces, they would prefer to use the DPR and LPR first to do their dirty work, because they are the local people and they are less valuable to the conventional Russians, or you kind of otherizing them. So there have been these complaints from DPR and LPR personnel before that they have been treated like that, and then you get a bit of tension between them. They've now been assimilated under the Russian conventional forces in terms of organization, but what that means is if you've got 51,000 Russian soldiers dead, then if you're going to add DPR and LPR to that, that's going to go up. And then all the many people that won't be included on that list who have died. So all the people that those two organizations have missed, or that have died, they've got announcement that those people have died. But if they haven't said it was as a result of the war, then they can't, even though that might well have been, they just haven't said, oh, it's so sad. You know, Ivan Ivanovich has his funeral next Tuesday. Hope everyone comes along, as you write that on Facebook and whatnot, and they pick that up and they're like, doesn't say anything about the war. We're pretty sure he's in a war, but we can't do that. So that doesn't get added. That person won't get added to the list. So that 51,000 will be much higher. So the question is, can it be as high as 150,000? That's now what the French foreign minister is saying. And we've heard from the British analysts recently that, I forget what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was over 100,000. So there are these differing numbers. Where is the actual reality? But yeah, it's worth taking into account. We have a Russian book system here getting hit. Launcher with 6 missiles is gone. Quite a lot of cooking off there. Now we have seen that's a 5th book I've seen in, I think, 3 days now. We had 2 books, then 2 books. 2 books hit up in the was it Belgorod on the other side of the Sumy Oblast. Two other books, and then now this one. So they are losing quite a few of these. Radio Svoboda has published satellite imagery in the aftermath of the apparent Ukrainian strikes on Jankoy Air Base on the 30th. So this is one from 4 days ago. Looks like at least one transporter erector launcher, so TEL, of the Russian S-300 or S-400 surface-to-air missile system could have been destroyed. The rest of the equipment deployed in a close proximity was evacuated shortly after the strikes. It's really difficult to tell what was damaged and destroyed here, because one presumes that if they are damaged, they're going to take them away to try and get them fixed. And so we know that there's quite a lot of equipment there initially, and then it's disappeared. But if you have a TEL getting hit, that's going to be cooking off. Doesn't seem to be any other explosions or scorch marks from around here. So it might be that either there was no damage to the other stuff or very limited damage. But that's only in that one place. We know Jankoy was burning red at night from that night. So yeah, this is being variously reported. Aftermath of alleged. This is actually, no, that's the same one here. So we can have a look at this a little more closely. So aftermath of the alleged strike on Jankoy airfield, all S-300, 400 systems will move away. One appears to be damaged badly. Largest square. Some other craters, one even smoke coming out of it, are all visible as well. So this was taken on May the 1st and the 27th. So the comparison is 27th to the 1st. So we have some destruction of kit. Quite a lot of kit there. And then some scorch marks going quite a lot to the left. So that previous one was looking more to just here. But actually, there could be quite a lot of damage to equipment further to the left. Because, of course, when you have the equipment being here, that was 3 days before the strikes. There's nothing to say that this wasn't then moved over to here, because it appears that then there are scorch marks all the way over here. So the previous tweet was just looking at this area and said, well, of the stuff that was around here, there's only scorch mark there, but it could be that that was now part of the kit that had been moved over to this square. I don't know whether that's a realistic assumption, but there's certainly scorch marks all around to the left of that. So something has been damaged or destroyed other than what was most probably that TEL, that transporter erector launcher. Now, there has been a larger scale attack on Bakhmut or on Chasiv Yar west of Bakhmut using the turtle tanks again. So we've seen them use these in Krasnohorivka, and they do seem to be effective. They do a job, which is protecting that first tank in a column of tanks that often has a mine roller as well. It's much harder to take that out with smaller FPV drones. It gets through, clears a path, drops off some people, and then gets out of dodge. And it's all about, even if some of the other vehicles don't make it, it's all about getting some presence, some foothold in whatever the target objective is. As far as the Ukrainians losing kit, alleged destruction of 2 IRIS-T surface-to-air missile launchers, the transporter erector launchers from the medium-range system. This would be bad if it's true, of a Ukrainian air defense battery claimed in a village in the south of Kharkiv Oblast by air-launched bombs. However, War Vehicle Tracker says, I don't see anything resembling an IRIS-T SLM TEL, but would like to hear German aid to Ukraine's opinion here. And so the claim was it's IRIS-T, but after help from German aid to Ukraine, I've concluded that whatever it is not an IRIS-T SLM component. All IRIS-T components are on a man-cat truck chassis, which has two pace 2 tire setups, pictures 1 and 2. However, if that the vehicle, if that is in the back, however, has 4 tires next to each other. Yes, I can see there. So the 4 tires. So this is not an IRIS-T. That is, you got 2 and then a space and then 2. These have got 4 tires next to each other. So whatever it is, it's not an RST. As for the 2 claimed launchers, German aid to Ukraine said they are likely containers, hence the fuel detonation scene. They're also missing a cabin, tires, etc. So the Russians are claiming that that's 2 IRIS-Ts, but without knowing what they are, it's not IRIS-T launchers, that's for sure. It does look like a fairly significant explosion there, though. So likely a fuel carrier, because that is, yes, some serious lack of foliage from going from that to that. There's some serious damage. And so something was hit, just probably not what the Russians claimed. And then last night, another significant burning factory in Moscow. Don't know what that was, just an indescript industrial unit as far as I know, but something was burning in Moscow. So that has happened. Administrative and production building is on fire in Moscow, says no reports. Fire is 2,500 square meters, so pretty significant, and the roof of the building is completely collapsed. So that happened yesterday. As far as strikes overnight, there were claims that Jankoy in Crimea, explosions were being heard according to residents. Don't know any details at the moment. Something might come out. So Jankoy is definitely somewhere where it's getting a lot of attention at the moment. On successive sort of nights, or certainly in close succession. Ukraine has inflicted several strikes on the occupiers in Kherson region as well. Apparently, artillery rounds hitting Oleshkin, something there going up, but that's with artillery. Big fire now burning, says Tim White. And then occupied Berdyansk is on fire. Fairly significant explosion and fire there. In the Kolonia micro district, reports of a strong one there. So that is, I presume, good news for the Ukrainians. We just don't know what damage was done. Also, it appears to be a petrol station in Shebekino, which is one of the main places that was attacked by the Free Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps across the border into Belgorod and Kursk. This is one of the main places, so just over the border. Anyway, it's been struck. Fire broke out the Russian town of Shebekino, preliminary as a result of an attack of the Ukrainian armed forces, according to the Russian media. Fire is reported on the territory of a commercial enterprise. No information on casualties. Don't know why or what other details other than something is definitely burning there. Now, this is coming from Osint Yuri saying that a new Ukrainian tactic. Last night, Ukraine conducted long-range OWUAV, so long-range drone strikes on Russian railroad infrastructure. And note, the AFU-GUR SBU strategies, so sort of the Ukrainian army, military intelligence, etc., strategies regarding these strikes on Russian territory have two purposes right now. One, cause economic damage to the Russian war economy and deprive the Russian military of fuel. And two, destroy infrastructure that will impact Russia's ability to support a large-scale offensive in the east, including Kharkiv region of Ukraine. So the Ukrainians began to attack enemy railway infrastructure with drones. In just one night, traction power substations, TPSS, in the Oryol and Kursk regions of Russia were attacked. At about 2300 local time, drones attacked traction power substations on the railways located near the Ponry and Svoboda stations in the Kursk region. After 15 minutes, traction power substations located in the Zmyevka and Glazunovka section in the Oryol region were also attacked. Transformer substations were also attacked at the same stretch. As a result, an emergency power outage occurred in the Zmyevka and Glazunovka stations. For a moment, this is the main railway line in Moscow, Oryol, Belgorod, along which military ammunition is transported. So it's really interesting that we don't often hear of everything that's being hit. We hear that Russians claim that 6 drones were shot down in Kursk and 3 in Belgorod, and yeah, you hear of all these being shot down, but then what's the reality behind that and what has also been hit? Sometimes we see, when it's things like oil refineries and oil depots, that's much more significant in terms of the reality of the fire, that people will take imagery of that, and we often see that. In terms of smaller substations or particular niche components of the railway network, we might not see that. But here, interesting, 4 targets on that one railway line. So this does look like strategic targeting by the Ukrainians. It is exactly what you'd expect. Pretty sensible stuff. Russians have launched the first train, speaking of railways, and this is going to be hit. Russia has launched the first train on the railway that is being built in the Azov region as an alternative to the Kerch Bridge, according to Petro Andriushchenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. The train left Mariupol port for Volnovakha station today. So this railway line is going from Rostov-on-Don to the west, pretty much, let's say, Rostov-on-Don, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol, something like that. But it, I presume, is being connected up to Volnovakha here. The problem with Volnovakha is it's really close to Vuhledar and gets hit quite a lot. But nonetheless, a train has gone from Mariupol to Volnovakha. So this is a worry for the Ukrainians. This is the Russians' alternative to going over the Kerch, which I don't think still has... If it does have railway going across there, it can only take a certain weight. So it's basically, Kerch Bridge is operational, but it's not brilliantly operational. And this is their alternative. But you can assume that this is going to be heavily targeted by the Ukrainians for sure. So I guess we'll have to wait and see there. And here we have a quote. I think we have up to 2 months to eliminate as many Russian war objects as possible before the Russians will adapt to ATACMS, according to Ivan Stupak. There are claims that there are 4... I talked about the 4 ATACMS that were sent into Luhansk that took out supposedly 100 Russian soldiers training there. There was 1 dud and 3 hit variously around. I think it was Cheryl that was saying on a thread yesterday that she had heard that there was electronic warfare affecting the ATACMS, and that could be why a couple of them seemed to land further away. I don't know whether that was where they're supposed to land or whether this is a case that there was some inaccuracy due to electronic warfare. But anyway, so you are going to see ATACMS get used a lot before the Russians can react. And actually, we have seen them being used more than I was expecting. But then if you've got them, you might as well use them. You might as well take everything out now that you can. Exactly for the reason of before the Russians can react to it in terms of moving stuff out of range or electronic warfare. And B, because you want to debilitate the Russians as much as possible right now, so they can't do anything right now. So it's obvious they want to use them as much as possible now, rather than keeping them and using them over time, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. Right. It's worth mentioning this here. I'm going to talk about this later as well, but this came out last night and then it was retracted by Reuters and then it came out more officially. So David Cameron, the UK Foreign Secretary, has gone to Ukraine and he has said he's announced a $3 billion military aid package, and he says, and that's going to continue onwards, which is really great. So you might think $3 billion, that's not as much. The US has just given $61 billion. Right. Our GDP is a seventh of the size of the US. So times that by 7 and you got 21 billion pounds. Sorry, it's not 3. I think it's 3 billion. Yeah, so 3.7. So actually that's about $25 billion a year, every year, in terms of what the US equivalent would be. Now, if you remember when we looked at the aid package, the $61 billion aid package, the actual military aid component of that is $20 to $25 billion. So in other words, what the UK has done is, as far as I can work out, equivalent to what the US has done. And not only that, he's done two things, David Cameron. This is not me trying to be woohoo UK. It's just like, good, this is good, let's keep it up. He said is going to continue. So that's like saying the $61 billion aid package to Ukraine from the US will continue every year. So he hasn't put an end on that. He said it will continue. But the second big thing is that you can use UK missiles into Russia. So this is massive. Ukraine has a right, just as Russia is striking inside Ukraine. You can quite understand why Ukraine feels the need to make sure it's defending itself. And yeah, they've got that military aid for as long as it takes. This is big from the UK, and if that really does mean that Ukraine can strike within Russian territory, this is a bit of a game changer. So although the range on the Storm Shadows might not be the biggest, they are able to get. I mean, there are talks about actually they are not the export variant, but the variant that has the full range. And if so, is it 500 kilometers? They can certainly get into Russian territory. It might not be 1,000 kilometers into Russian territory, but they can reach Russian territory. And if needs be, if Ukraine can, it seems, use British missiles. That is big news. Okay. Right, sobering article moving on to other bits and pieces in The Economist. Shashant Joshi from The Economist says a very sobering Ollie Carroll interview with Ukraine's Deputy Military Intelligence Chief. He says Chasiv Yar will fall eventually, which is exactly what we've been saying. Like Greg Terry was saying that, 6 weeks ago, speaking to commanders on the ground there in Chasiv Yar. They're like, yeah, it's going to fall. We're going to lose it. But it's just how long it takes and how much attrition can we exact on the Russians. Anyway, it will fall eventually. That Ukraine is far from stabilizing the front, so that's quite depressing. And that Russia is, quote, generating a division of reserves and wants to strike Sumy Kharkiv. So this is interesting because I talked about that the last couple of days in my frontline update. And there is this theory. There are Chechen units up there. There is supposedly 50,000 across the 3 oblasts. I still don't think that's enough. Yeah, and I don't know whether... Yeah, I don't know what purpose he would have in saying that would be outside of that's the truth and that's what he genuinely believes. So I don't know if there's any psyops worth of saying this, unless it is literally, we are actually worried that the Russians are going to attack, but I just don't know how the Russians can attack across the north without getting absolutely minced on the huge amounts of fortifications and minefields, because you can complain that the fortifications aren't around Avdiivka as much as they should be, and that's a genuine criticism, but they are up on the northern border. Like, Ukraine has done, as far as I'm aware, a good job of building up defences across there, precisely so they don't have to keep troops up there en masse, and it is absolutely hellishly mined. I'm absolutely positive. And so if the Russians are really serious about an attack from the north, like, what are they going to try and achieve? Like, try and take a massive city like Kharkiv? Have you seen how much attrition happened over Novomykhailivka, which is a tiny little settlement? So I think that's I just think that would be a really bad decision of the Russians, and it can only surely be about trying to divert attention from the front line. But then you have this trade-off. So the more troops you put to a diversion, if you're not actually going to do that, then you are pulling some troops away from the front line, from the enemy. But why not just take all those troops and put them against those troops on the front line where you're trying to divert them away from? So in other words, the diversionary troops are arguably better utilized in the actual warfare on the front line against the troops that you're trying to divert away. So yeah, I just don't know. Anyway, quote, right now both sides are jockeying for the most favourable position ahead of the potential talks, but meaningful negotiations can begin only in the second half of 2025 at the earliest, he guesses. In other words, he's saying we'll have talks after we do our counter-offensive, which is absolutely fair enough. US intelligence chief has said Russia's war against Ukraine is unlikely to end anytime soon. So Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine is unlikely to end anytime soon, according to Avril Haines, saying that yesterday, Reuters reports. Ukraine's MOD has published a video of ongoing construction of new fortifications in its 5 most at-risk regions: Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Sumy, and Kharkiv. Now, this is all great. There have been just many criticisms that they have not sorted it out in Donetsk enough. Like the Avdiivka region is where this is not present, at least where it needs to be. So because they've been too late in building these, and because you have to build them, so I don't know, 70k behind the front line, so these excavators, these diggers don't get pummeled by drones, it means that they're having to build them now further back from where they would really like to have built them, which is they should have built them when they were as far to the east in Avdiivka as possible, i.e. like last year. But they didn't build them, and they appeared to wait until they lost Avdiivka and then panic into building them. But it means you then have to go further back to build your fortifications, which means that you cede even more territory before you get to the fortifications. So that's the issue in Donetsk. But I think in many other places, like Zaporizhia seems to be fairly solid. And I think the northern borders, as I was saying, seems to be fairly solid. So good news in general, but possibly too late in some places. Get used to more of this in the coming months. Quote, sabotage, acts of violence, cyber and electronic interference, disinformation campaigns, and other hybrid operations. So this is NATO. NATO report saying stuff is going to get serious. So this is their statement. I'm going to read it to you. So NATO allies are deeply concerned about recent malign activities on allied territory, including those resulting in the investigation and charging of multiple individuals in connection with hostile state activity affecting Czechia, Estonia, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and the United Kingdom. These incidents are part of an intensifying campaign of activities which Russia continues to carry out across the Euro-Atlantic area, including on alliance territory and through proxies. This includes sabotage, acts of violence, cyber and electronic interference, disinformation campaigns, and other hybrid operations. NATO allies express their deep concern over Russia's hybrid actions, which constitute a threat to Allied security. We support and stand in solidarity with the affected allies. We will act individually and collectively to address these actions, and will continue to coordinate closely. We will continue to boost our resilience and to apply and enhance the tools at our disposal and counter and contest Russian hybrid actions that will ensure that the alliance and allies are prepared to deter and defend against hybrid actions or attacks. We condemn Russia's behaviour, and we call on Russia to uphold its international obligations as allies do theirs. Russia's actions will not deter allies from continuing to support Ukraine. So really good, robust language there from NATO saying exactly what's going on. Meanwhile, Russia's having its own internal issues with people in the Russian military hierarchy. So we know that Ivanov was the 2IC was arrested. It's Shoigu, then him, and I think the third person, so his deputy, has also been taken in for questioning, and lots of people are saying basically this is an attack on Shoigu will go. I don't know if Shoigu is a fall guy or whether there is massive amounts of corruption, right? These guys have like objectively siphoned off a phenomenal amount of money. You only have to look at this guy's, he's like the second richest guy in Ukraine, I believe. Like his mansions are nuts, and yet he's like the second in command of the Ministry of Defense, right? Like, where's he getting that money? Where's that money coming from? Like, that's like going to the second in command of the British MOD and then finding out that he wasn't, before he started in that job, particularly rich, but then after doing that job, he's a gazillionaire. And you're like, you've just been doing a state job. Where's that come from? And it's the same with Putin. Of course, Putin's the richest man. So this is obviously like those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Putin is the richest man in the world, and for the exact same reason that he siphoned off all sorts of stuff from the Russian natural resources over time. And so I think the Russian people turn a blind eye. People like Navalny didn't, and they were recording Putin's corruption. He is a kleptocrat. He has stolen from his state. But people are too afraid to say anything about it, or cognitive dissonance reduction means psychologically they will bury their head in the sand or ignore that data because it's uncomfortable for them. And that allows Putin to continue to get away with what he does, was also enabling himself through a massive iron grip on the internal security forces. That means any discussion of his corruption is very quickly quashed. Well, there are now rumours about Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, who's an old hand, Russian foreign affairs minister's dismissal and possible appointment of Russian deputy prime minister Alexander Novak instead. They circulated on Russian Telegram channels. Can't at all confirm this, but the rumours are out there. It's also reported that Lavrov was furious when he saw these statements in the media and Telegram channels. So maybe he hasn't been. Who knows? Anyway, the rumours are out there. Something's going on in the Russian government, that's for sure. And I'm gonna finish with just a truly beautiful story. Actually, this is a nice one. You might like this, because I think sometimes we don't do enough like good news stories and things to like. It's all like negative and all about death and destruction and war and horrific war crimes. So it's nice to end on a positive note. So I'm gonna just finish with this story. And the two Russian guys, lovely guys. So a cannibal and a serial killer were released from prison and went to the front line. The cannibal, Dmitry Malyshev, who ate Tajik's heart and recorded the whole process on camera, was released from prison and went to war in Ukraine to fight sex education in schools and gays. At the front, he met a maniac who dismembered his victims. And now they're best friends. That's beautiful, isn't it? So a cannibal and a maniac who's dismembered his victims are now friends on the front line, fighting gays and people who advocate for sex education in schools. Well done, Russia. Good stuff. Okay, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please take care. I will speak to you soon in the next video. Toodle pips.